I found the love message from Plumber NY on his phone. I didn't cry. I bought a new SIM, blocked her, and became her. What I did next became the most epic revenge story our friends still talk about years later. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and until 3 months ago, I believed I was living a successful marriage. I was 38 years old, sitting in our Manhattan apartment that overlooked absolutely nothing interesting, married to a man who had just been promoted to middle manager at Goldman Sachs. You'd think that would be cause for celebration. You'd be wrong. The promotion changed everything, though looking back, it didn't change Marcus so much as it gave him permission to become who he'd always wanted to be, a complete bastard with a business card to prove it. "Sarah, we need to talk about your image," Marcus announced the Monday after his promotion, straightening his tie in our hallway mirror like he was preparing for a board meeting instead of a conversation with his wife. "Now that I'm in management, we need to maintain certain standards." I was folding laundry at the time, his laundry naturally, since my job for the past 12 years had been supporting his career. The irony wasn't lost on me that a woman with an MBA from Columbia was now an expert in starch preferences and collar maintenance. "What kind of standards?" I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. "Well, for starters, that dress you wore to the company dinner last week was inappropriate, too casual. The other managers' wives dress like they understand their position." He adjusted his cufflinks. New ones, I noticed, probably purchased to celebrate his ascension to the lower rungs of middle management. "I need you to step up your game." Step up my game. As if the past 12 years of my life had been some kind of casual hobby instead of a complete sacrifice of my own ambitions. I'd given up my marketing career when Marcus decided we needed to focus on his trajectory, as he so eloquently put it. His trajectory, apparently, required a full-time wife to handle every domestic detail so he could concentrate on becoming the kind of man who used words like trajectory in casual conversation. "I'll keep that in mind," I said, because arguing with Marcus about his opinions was like trying to negotiate with a brick wall that wore expensive cologne. The financial control started immediately. Marcus had always handled our finances, another sacrifice I'd made for the sake of marital harmony, but the promotion gave him new ideas about money management, specifically my complete exclusion from it. "I'm setting up a new system," he announced over breakfast the following Tuesday, sliding a credit card across our granite countertop like he was doing me an enormous favor. "This card has a $500 monthly limit for groceries and household expenses. It should be more than enough if you're smart about it." $500 in Manhattan for a month. I stared at the card like it might multiply if I looked hard enough. "Marcus, groceries alone cost more than that. And what about everything else? Cleaning supplies, utilities, my personal expenses?" He didn't look up from his phone, where he was undoubtedly reading something that made him feel important. "I'll handle the utilities directly. As for personal expenses, well, what do you really need? I'm the one who has to look professional for work." What did I really need? Apparently, nothing. According to Marcus, my needs had been reduced to grocery money and the privilege of living in an apartment I couldn't afford on my own, wearing clothes I couldn't buy, eating food I had to budget like a college student. The public humiliation was perhaps the most creative aspect of Marcus's post-promotion personality. He'd always had a tendency toward casual cruelty, but now he had an audience that seemed to appreciate his particular brand of wit. "Sarah used to work," he told the Hendersons at their dinner party the following month, speaking about me like I was an interesting historical artifact. Before she realized she'd married up, of course. Now she can focus on the important things, like making sure I have clean shirts. He laughed at his own joke, and I watched our friends laugh along, because nothing's funnier than a woman's abandoned dreams. "What did you do?" Mrs. Henderson asked, and I could see the polite disinterest in her eyes. She was asking because it was expected, not because she cared. Before I could answer, Marcus jumped in. "Marketing. Nothing too challenging. She's much better suited to domestic life, aren't you, honey?" The way he said honey made it sound like a diagnosis rather than an endearment. I smiled and nodded because that's what you do when your husband is systematically erasing your professional identity in front of people you have to see regularly. Much better, I agreed, taking a large gulp of wine that I hoped would numb the humiliation. But the real masterpiece was Marcus's flirting. Not subtle, appreciative glances at attractive women, though he did plenty of that, but open, deliberate attention that he paid to other women while I stood right there. His promotion had apparently made him irresistible to the female population, or at least that's what he seemed to believe. "You know, Jennifer," he said to our neighbor's 20-something daughter at a building barbecue, "you should let me know if you ever want advice about breaking into finance. Management has its perks." He handed her his business card with a smile that suggested finance wasn't the only thing he'd be happy to help her break into. I watched this interaction from approximately 6 feet away, holding a plate of potato salad and wondering if it would be inappropriate to dump it on his head. Probably. Potato salad is expensive on a $500 budget. "Marcus is so helpful," Jennifer said to me later, waving his card like a golden ticket. "He said he knows all the right people." "I'm sure he does," I replied, because what else could I say? That my husband was a middle manager who'd been promoted 3 months ago and thought it made him Gordon Gekko. That his connections consisted mostly of people who had to tolerate him because he was technically their boss. That his idea of networking was apparently hitting on women young enough to be his daughter. The gaslighting was perhaps the most insidious part of Marcus's new personality. He'd always been good at rewriting history to suit his narrative, but the promotion had given him new confidence in his ability to reshape reality. "I never said you couldn't buy new clothes," he told me when I mentioned that my wardrobe was becoming embarrassingly limited. "I said you should be more thoughtful about your purchases. There's a difference." Except he had said I couldn't buy new clothes. He'd said it specifically 2 weeks earlier when I'd asked about replacing a dress that had developed a hole in an unfortunate location. "We need to prioritize," he'd said then, "and right now my wardrobe takes priority." But according to Marcus, that conversation had never happened. According to Marcus, I was being overly sensitive and dramatic and putting words in his mouth. According to Marcus, the problem wasn't his behavior, but my perception of it. "You're imagining things," became his favorite phrase, deployed whenever I questioned his version of events. It was remarkably effective. After a few months of being told I was imagining things, I started to wonder if maybe I was. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe I was being dramatic. Maybe the problem really was me. He started hiding my things, small things I might have misplaced on my own. My reading glasses would disappear from my nightstand and turn up in the kitchen drawer. My car keys would vanish from their hook and appear in my purse, which I was certain I'd already checked. My favorite coffee mug would go missing for days before reappearing in the cabinet, clean and innocent, as if it had been there all along. "Are you feeling okay?" Marcus would ask with concerned husband voice when I mentioned these disappearances. "You seem a little scattered lately. Maybe you should see someone." Maybe I should see someone. The suggestion was always delivered with such caring concern, such loving worry about my mental state. The kind of concern that made me question whether there really was something wrong with me, whether I really was losing my mind, whether the woman I used to be, organized, competent, professional, had somehow deteriorated into someone who couldn't keep track of her own belongings. The emotional cruelty was the crescendo of Marcus's symphony of abuse, the grand finale that tied together all his other techniques into one devastating performance. "I settled for you," he told me one evening as we got ready for bed, delivering the line like he was commenting on the weather. "I hope you know that. I could have married anyone, but I chose you." Chose me. Past tense. As if the choosing had been completed and could not be undone, as if I should be grateful for his historical decision rather than expecting ongoing appreciation. "You should probably lose some weight," he mentioned another night, watching me get undressed with the clinical detachment of a judge evaluating livestock. The other managers' wives take better care of themselves. The other managers' wives. They were his constant reference point, the standard by which my failures were measured. The other managers' wives dressed better, looked younger, smiled more, complained less. The other managers' wives understood their role in the success ecosystem that was their husbands' careers. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd married Jessica instead, he said one particularly cruel evening, referring to my best friend with the kind of wistful regret usually reserved for discussing missed investment opportunities. She really gets what it means to support a man's ambitions. Jessica, my best friend since college, the woman who'd been my maid of honor, the person I called when I needed to cry about my marriage. Jessica, who listened to me sob about Marcus's treatment and offered tissues and wine and reassurance that things would get better. But I married you, Marcus continued, and I'm committed to making the best of it. Making the best of it. His marriage to me was apparently a suboptimal situation that required strategic management rather than a relationship built on love and partnership. I was a problem to be solved rather than a person to be cherished. Looking back, I can see that Marcus was systematically destroying my sense of self-worth, isolating me from my own identity, making me dependent on his approval for any sense of value. But at the time, living inside the situation, it felt like maybe he was right. Maybe I was lucky he'd married me. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe the problem really was me. After all, he was the successful one. He was the one with the promotion, the career trajectory, the important meetings and networking opportunities. He was the one who understood how the world worked, who knew what it took to succeed in business, who had the expertise to make financial decisions for our household. I was just the woman who couldn't keep track of her coffee mug. The discovery came on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of crisp fall day that makes Manhattan feel almost livable. Marcus had left for work with his usual performance of self-importance, checking his phone, adjusting his suit, muttering about important calls he had to make. I was cleaning our bedroom, a task that had somehow become as complex as international diplomacy, since I now had to work around Marcus's increasingly elaborate grooming routine. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He'd forgotten it, which was roughly equivalent to leaving behind a vital organ, given how attached he'd become to the device since his promotion. I picked it up, intending to call him at the office, when the message notification caught my eye. "Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible." The message was from Plumber NY. I stared at the screen, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. A plumber was sending my husband heart emojis and talking about last night? Either we had the most emotionally invested contractor in New York City, or something was very, very wrong. My hands were shaking as I opened the message thread. The conversation history was completely empty except for this one message. No previous texts, no context, nothing that might explain why a plumber was apparently having incredible nights with my husband. But then I remembered. Marcus was always having plumbing emergencies. Always. The bathroom faucet that needed immediate attention last Tuesday when I was visiting my sister. The kitchen sink that couldn't wait the previous month when I'd gone to book club. The mysterious leak in the guest bathroom that required emergency repairs on the same night I'd gone to dinner with friends. I'd found it odd, honestly. Our apartment was only 5 years old and the building had excellent maintenance. But Marcus had been so stressed about these recurring plumbing issues, so apologetic about the costs, so relieved when Plumber NY could always fit us into their busy schedule. Plumber NY, who apparently sent romantic messages. With my heart hammering against my ribs, I grabbed our laptop and logged into our online banking. Marcus controlled our finances, but I still had access to view the accounts. I just hadn't looked in months because the $500 grocery limit had been so humiliating that I'd stopped wanting to know the details of our financial life. Now I searched for anything related to plumbing. What I found was a masterclass in creative accounting. NY Plumbing LLC appeared in our transaction history with shocking regularity. Not just the obvious recent charges, but going back almost 2 years. Payments that ranged from $200 to $800, always labeled as emergency repairs or maintenance fees. Always on evenings when I'd been out of the apartment. The amounts were too large for simple repairs and too frequent for a building that rarely had maintenance issues. But more damning were the patterns I started to notice as I scrolled through months of statements. Hotel charges. They were buried among his business expenses, labeled things like client dinner or conference room rental. But I recognized some of the names. The Meridian, the Plaza, boutique hotels in Midtown that weren't the kind of places you'd take clients unless your clients were looking for a very specific kind of service. And always, within a day or two of the plumbing charges. Uber receipts were the final piece of the puzzle. Marcus's corporate card showed rides to these hotels during times when he was supposed to be at work on the same days as the mysterious plumbing emergencies. The timing was so precise it was almost insulting. Emergency plumbing call at 2 p.m., Uber to the Meridian at 2:30 p.m., Uber home at 6 p.m., just in time for his usual arrival from work. I sat in our kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's affair, feeling strangely calm. It was almost a relief, honestly. For months, I'd been questioning my own sanity, wondering why I felt so unhappy in what Marcus insisted was a perfectly good marriage. Now I knew why. My husband was cheating on me with someone who went by Plumber NY, and he'd been billing it to our joint account like a business expense. The creativity was almost admirable. Most cheating husbands at least tried to hide the costs. Marcus had simply relabeled his affair as home maintenance and apparently expected me to never notice that our plumbing required more attention than a Victorian mansion. I picked up his phone again and stared at that single message. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was incredible. Last night. Monday night. The night Marcus had come home late because of an emergency client call that couldn't wait. The night he'd showered immediately when he got home, unusual for a man who typically saved his grooming routine for mornings. The night he'd been particularly affectionate, probably out of guilt, kissing me and telling me how much he appreciated me, while someone called Plumber NY was apparently thinking about how incredible their evening had been. The deleted message history suddenly made sense. Of course they deleted their conversations. Marcus was paranoid about security, always talking about how dangerous it was to leave sensitive information on devices. I'd assumed he was being overcautious about work communications. Instead, he was being cautious about his affair. But that deleted history was about to become very useful. I spent the rest of the morning researching divorce laws in New York, learning about asset division and spousal support, and all the practical details of ending a marriage. What I discovered was that I needed evidence of the affair to protect myself financially. Marcus's income was substantially higher than the nothing I currently earned, but infidelity could affect the settlement. The problem was that one text message and some suspicious bank statements weren't enough. I needed more concrete proof, something that clearly established the affair and hopefully identified who Plumber NY actually was. That's when I had the idea that would change everything. Marcus and his mistress deleted their message history regularly, which meant they were security conscious, but also meant they wouldn't notice if something changed. What if I became Plumber NY? The plan formed in my mind with startling clarity. I could block the real Plumber NY number from Marcus's phone and create a new contact under the same name using a prepaid SIM card. Marcus would continue receiving messages from Plumber NY, but now I would be the one sending them. The beauty of it was that Marcus wouldn't suspect anything. He was used to empty conversation threads. He was used to his mistress being available whenever he wanted to communicate. I could be anyone I wanted to be in those messages. I could say anything I wanted to say. I could manipulate his schedule, his emotions, his expectations. I could gather evidence of his responses, document his willingness to meet up, prove the ongoing nature of their relationship, and maybe, just maybe, I could set him up for something special. Drop a comment below and let me know. Are you Team Sarah so far? And if you're enjoying this revenge story, hit that like button, because trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. Sarah's about to pull off something absolutely legendary. I drove to Brooklyn that afternoon and bought a prepaid phone and SIM card from a store in a neighborhood where nobody would recognize me. The teenager behind the counter couldn't have cared less about my identity or my intentions. He just wanted to process the transaction and get back to his social media. When I got home, Marcus was still at work, probably scheduling his next plumbing emergency. I had several hours to execute the first phase of my plan. Blocking the real Plumber NY number from Marcus's phone was surprisingly easy. Modern smartphones make it simple to block unwanted calls and texts, and Marcus's phone was already logged into our shared iCloud account. I found the number in his recent calls list and blocked it permanently. Then I created a new contact called Plumber NY, using my new prepaid number. I even found an appropriate contact photo, a generic image of tools that looked professional and innocent. Now, when Marcus texted Plumber NY, he'd be texting me. When Plumber NY responded, it would be me responding. And Marcus would have no way of knowing that anything had changed. The empty conversation thread looked exactly the same as it always did. I spent the evening researching what I would do with this new power. I needed to gather evidence, but I also needed to be strategic. Simply documenting the affair might be enough for a divorce, but I wanted more than that. I wanted justice. I wanted Marcus to understand what it felt like to be manipulated, humiliated, and betrayed. I wanted revenge. But first, I needed to establish my cover story. I needed an alibi that would give Marcus enough freedom to feel comfortable planning an affair meetup, something that would get me out of the apartment long enough for him to think he had privacy. That's when I thought of my sister in Boston. "Rachel," I said when I called her that evening, "I need you to do me a favor, and I can't explain why yet." "Okay," she said, because Rachel was the kind of sister who agreed to favors before hearing the details. "What do you need?" "If anyone asks, I'm coming to visit you next Thursday to help with childcare while you go out of town. I need you to back up that story if Marcus calls to check." There was a pause. "Sarah, is everything okay?" "It will be," I said, "but I need you to trust me on this." "Of course. Should I be worried?" I looked around our apartment, at the life I'd built with a man who was systematically destroying my sense of self while billing his affair to our joint account. "No," I said. "You should be excited. I think things are about to get very interesting." That night, as Marcus slept beside me, probably dreaming about his next plumbing emergency, I lay awake planning the most elaborate revenge I'd ever imagined. I was going to use his own affair against him. I was going to manipulate him the way he'd been manipulating me. I was going to turn his secret weapon into my secret weapon. And when I was done, Marcus was going to understand exactly what it felt like to be the victim instead of the victimizer. The war had begun, and he didn't even know it yet. The first test message came the next morning. Marcus had left for work with his usual routine of self-importance, and I waited exactly 1 hour before sending my inaugural communication as Plumber NY. "Good morning, handsome. Thinking about you." I kept it simple, generic enough that it could come from anyone, warm enough to maintain the romantic connection Marcus clearly expected from his affair partner. The empty conversation thread meant I had no previous messages to reference, no established personality to maintain. I could be whoever I wanted to be. His response came within minutes. "Good morning, beautiful. Last night was perfect. When can I see you again?" Last night. Monday night, when Marcus had supposedly been dealing with a work emergency. Now I had his confession in writing, a direct admission that whatever had happened Monday evening was romantic rather than professional. "I'm so glad you enjoyed it. When are you free next?" "Sarah's going to visit her sister Thursday. We could have the whole evening together." Perfect. He just handed me exactly the scenario I needed. Not only was he planning another affair meetup, but he was specifically planning it around my supposed absence. The Thursday when I would allegedly be in Boston would be the Thursday when Marcus expected to have unlimited time with his mistress. Thursday sounds perfect. I have something special planned for you. Can't wait. You always know exactly what I need. The irony was delicious. Marcus thought his mistress knew what he needed, but now I was the one controlling the conversation. I was the one deciding what he needed, and what he needed was a lesson in consequences. Over the next couple of days, I continued our text conversation, learning more about Marcus's affair than I'd ever wanted to know. He was surprisingly sentimental in his messages, talking about how the relationship made him feel young again, how exciting it was to have someone who understood his ambitions, how much he looked forward to their time together. "You're the only person who really gets me," he texted on Wednesday morning. "I understand you better than you know," I replied, which was possibly the most honest thing either of us had said in months. He also provided logistical information that was invaluable for my planning. Their usual meeting spot was apparently a hotel in Midtown, but he was excited about the possibility of having somewhere special for Thursday's encounter. He mentioned how careful they'd been about keeping their communication secret, how smart they were to delete their message history regularly. "No one can ever find out about us," he wrote. "It would ruin everything." "Don't worry," I texted back. "Our secret is safe." While I was conducting this elaborate deception, I was also planning the second part of my revenge, the party. Marcus's promotion celebration would be the perfect cover for what I had in mind. Our friends would expect a celebration, Marcus would expect privacy, and I would deliver something none of them anticipated. I started with the guest list. I wanted our close circle, the people who'd witnessed Marcus's transformation from regular husband to insufferable middle manager, the people who'd heard him humiliate me at dinner parties and social events. They deserved to see what their entertainment had been costing. Dave and Rebecca from Marcus's office, who'd watched him flirt with other women at company parties. Tom and Linda from our building, who'd heard him deliver his "Sarah used to work before she married up" routine at the building barbecue. My friend Angela and her husband, who'd witnessed Marcus's increasingly creative put-downs during game nights. And Jessica, my best friend Jessica, who'd been my confidant throughout this marriage, who'd listened to me cry about Marcus's behavior, who'd offered advice and support and reassurance that things would get better. Jessica definitely needed to be there. I found a venue that was perfect for my purposes, a small event space in Midtown that could accommodate our group, but was sophisticated enough that Marcus wouldn't be suspicious about the location. It was the kind of place you might choose for an intimate celebration, but also the kind of place where someone might arrange a romantic rendezvous. "I'm planning a surprise party for Marcus's promotion," I told each guest when I called to invite them. "Thursday evening at 7. I know it's short notice, but I wanted to do something special to celebrate his new position." Everyone was enthusiastic about the idea. Marcus had been talking about his promotion so much that our friends were probably relieved to finally have an excuse to acknowledge it in a formal way. Several people mentioned how thoughtful I was to organize such a celebration, how lucky Marcus was to have such a supportive wife. If only they knew. The final piece of my plan required the most careful execution. On Thursday morning, I needed to convince Marcus that I was leaving for Boston while actually staying in the city to prepare for the evening's events. "The car's coming in 20 minutes. I announced over breakfast, loading fake luggage into my wheeled suitcase for effect. "Rachel needs me there by noon because she has to leave for her conference." Marcus was practically vibrating with excitement, though he tried to hide it behind his usual mask of husbandly concern. "I wish you didn't have to go," he said, the words hitting their mark with dead-on sincerity. "I'll miss you." "I'll miss you too," I replied, which was true in the sense that I would miss the Marcus I'd married before he became whatever this person was. "When will you be back?" "Friday evening. Rachel's flight doesn't get in until late, so I'll stay an extra night to help with the kids." "Well, I'll try to keep myself busy," he said, already pulling out his phone to text his mistress, probably planning the perfect romantic evening now that he had confirmed privacy. I kissed him goodbye and left the apartment with my suitcase, taking the elevator down to the lobby. But instead of getting into a car to go to the airport, I walked 2 blocks to the coffee shop where I'd arranged to wait until Marcus left for work. At 9 a.m., I received the text I'd been expecting. "Coast is clear. Can we move our meeting to earlier? I can't wait to see you." "How much earlier?" I responded as Plumber NY. "Lunch? 1 p.m.? Perfect. Meet me at the address I'm sending you. I have a very special surprise planned." I sent him the address of the event space, along with specific instructions that would become the centerpiece of my revenge. "When you arrive, go to the back entrance. I've left special clothes for you in the back room. Put them on. Then blindfold yourself and walk into the main hall when you hear music. I promise this will be our most unforgettable night." "Blindfold? You're so creative. I love this side of you." "You have no idea," I replied. The special clothes I'd mentioned were already waiting in the back room of the venue, a ridiculous costume I'd purchased specifically for this occasion. Red silk pajamas with hearts on them, the kind of thing you might find in a gag gift shop paired with fuzzy slippers and a robe that said "World's Greatest Lover" across the back. It was absurd, humiliating, and exactly the kind of outfit that would look particularly ridiculous in front of an audience of close friends and colleagues. At 6 p.m., I arrived at the venue to set up for the party. The space was perfect, elegant enough for a celebration, but with a clear view from the main entrance to the back room where Marcus would be changing into his surprise outfit. Our friends began arriving at 6:30, each carrying gifts or flowers or bottles of wine to celebrate Marcus's promotion. They were in festive moods, talking about how successful Marcus had become, how proud I must be of his advancement, how lucky we were that his hard work was finally being recognized. "This is so thoughtful of you," Angela said, setting down a bottle of champagne. "Marcus is going to be so surprised." "I certainly hope so," I replied, checking my phone for updates from my unwitting victim. At 6:45, Marcus texted his final message as a faithful husband. "Almost there. Can't wait to see what you have planned." "I'm waiting for you," I responded. "This is going to be perfect." It was 7 p.m. exactly when I positioned myself near the back entrance, listening for the sound of Marcus's arrival. Our friends were mingling in the main hall, drinking wine and speculating about where I'd gone and when the guest of honor would arrive. "Sarah said he'd be here by 7, Tom mentioned. "Maybe he's stuck in traffic." "You know Marcus," Dave replied. "Probably took a call from an important client." If only they knew what kind of call Marcus was expecting. At 7:03, I heard the back door open. Marcus had arrived for his romantic rendezvous, completely unaware that 8 of our closest friends were waiting in the main hall with party hats and congratulations. Through the wall, I could hear him moving around in the back room, probably discovering the costume I'd left for him. There was a pause, then what sounded like laughter. Marcus apparently found his special surprise amusing, rather than suspicious. Good. That would make what happened next even more satisfying. At 7:10, I gave the signal to our friends in the main hall. "Okay, everyone, I think I hear him coming. Remember, big surprise when he walks in." The room filled with excited energy as our friends positioned themselves for the big reveal. They were holding glasses of champagne, wearing party smiles, completely prepared to celebrate Marcus's professional achievement. They had no idea they were about to witness something entirely different. I cued the music, a romantic jazz playlist that would give Marcus the signal to make his entrance. In the back room, I could hear him moving toward the door, probably adjusting his blindfold, preparing for what he thought would be a passionate encounter with his mistress. Instead, he was about to walk into the most humiliating moment of his life, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. The music started, and I heard the back door open. "Surprise!" 8 voices shouted in unison as Marcus stumbled into the main hall, blindfolded and wearing red silk pajamas with hearts, his arms outstretched as he searched for his lover. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. Time stopped. 8 people stood frozen with champagne glasses halfway to their lips, party smiles melting into expressions of confused horror as they processed what they were seeing. Marcus, meanwhile, continued his blind stumble forward, apparently interpreting the shouted "surprise" as part of his romantic scenario. "Baby, is that you?" he called out, his voice thick with anticipation. "This is incredible. I can't believe you got a whole room for us." A whole room. He thought his mistress had rented an event space for their affair. The audacity was almost impressive. Who else but Marcus would assume his side piece had upgraded their usual hotel routine to include party planning? I stepped into the main hall from my hiding spot near the back entrance, positioning myself where Marcus could see me when he removed his blindfold. "Surprise indeed," I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I'm back early from babysitting." Marcus went rigid. Even blindfolded, he recognized my voice, and the confusion in his posture was visible from across the room. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't how his romantic evening was supposed to unfold. "Sarah?" he said, his voice cracking slightly. Why are you here? I thought you were in Boston." "Change of plans," I replied cheerfully, enjoying the way our friends were beginning to exchange glances, their confused expressions sharpening into something more suspicious. "Rachel's conference was canceled, so I came home to throw you a promotion party instead. Aren't you surprised?" Marcus reached up and yanked off his blindfold, blinking against the bright lights of the event space. What he saw was a room full of our closest friends, staring at him in his heart-covered pajamas, holding champagne glasses and wearing expressions that ranged from bewildered to appalled. The costume was even more ridiculous than I'd hoped. The red silk pajamas were too small and clung to him inappropriately. The heart pattern was visible from across the room, and the fuzzy slippers made him look like a deranged Valentine. The robe hung open, revealing the "world's greatest lover" text across his back to anyone standing behind him. Marcus started, then stopped, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the faces of our friends, the party decorations, the champagne and celebration that was supposed to be honoring his professional achievement. "Marcus," Dave said slowly, "what exactly are you wearing?" "And why were you blindfolded?" Rebecca added, her voice sharp with the kind of curiosity that suggested she was beginning to piece together elements of a story she didn't like. Before Marcus could formulate an answer, his phone buzzed in the pocket of his ridiculous pajamas. The notification sound was loud in the silent room, and everyone's attention focused on the device. "Aren't you going to get that?" I asked innocently. "It might be important." Marcus fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as he tried to check the message discreetly. But I already knew what it said, because I had sent it 30 seconds earlier from my position near the back entrance. "Hope you're enjoying your surprise, darling. XOXO, Plumber NY." I watched Marcus's face go white as he read the message, then look up at me with dawning horror. He was beginning to understand that something was very, very wrong, but he hadn't yet grasped the full scope of his situation. "Who's Plumber NY?" I asked loudly, addressing the room rather than Marcus specifically, because apparently they've been having incredible nights with my husband. The reaction was immediate and devastating. Angela gasped. Tom choked on his champagne. Rebecca grabbed Dave's arm so hard he winced. Linda actually took a step backward, as if distance could protect her from the contamination of witnessing someone else's marriage implode. But the most interesting reaction came from Jessica. My best friend Jessica, who had been standing near the refreshment table with a glass of wine and a bright smile, suddenly went pale. Not just surprised pale, but guilty pale. The kind of pale that comes from being caught doing something you desperately hoped would remain secret. And in that moment, watching Jessica's face transform from celebration-ready to panic-stricken, I understood something that made my stomach drop to my feet. Jessica wasn't just a witness to this disaster. Jessica was part of it. "Jessica!" Marcus suddenly exploded, his voice cracking with fury and desperation. "What the hell are you doing here? Why did you set me up like this? What kind of sick game is this?" The room went from shocked silence to electric tension in an instant. Everyone turned to look at Jessica, who was now backing toward the wall like a cornered animal. "I didn't," she said, her voice rising to near hysteria. "Sarah invited me. I don't know what's happening. I don't understand any of this." But Marcus wasn't listening to her denials. He was pointing at her with the kind of accusatory fury that only comes from someone who's been betrayed by a co-conspirator. "You told me you'd handle everything," he shouted. "You said you had the perfect plan. You said no one would ever find out." And suddenly, horribly, everything made perfect sense. Jessica. My best friend, Jessica, who had listened to me cry about my marriage troubles. Jessica, who had offered shoulders to cry on and reassurance that things would get better. Jessica, who had encouraged me to be patient with Marcus, to understand that his new position was stressful, to give him time to adjust to his new responsibilities. Jessica, who had been sleeping with my husband while consoling me about our marriage problems. "Oh my God," I said, the words coming out in a whisper that somehow carried across the entire room. "Jessica? You're Plumber NY?" The look on her face was answer enough. Guilt, panic, and the desperate calculation of someone trying to figure out how to escape from a situation that had spiraled completely out of control. "Sarah, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off. "You can explain?" My voice was rising now, months of suppressed anger finally finding an outlet. "You can explain how you've been sleeping with my husband while pretending to be my best friend? You can explain how you've been listening to me sob about my marriage while you were the reason I was crying?" The room had gone so silent that you could hear the air conditioning humming. 8 people were witnessing the complete destruction of not just a marriage, but a friendship and the social dynamics of our entire circle. "It's not what you think," Jessica said weakly, but her voice lacked any conviction. She knew exactly what it looked like, and she knew that's exactly what it was. "What I think," I said, pulling out my phone, "is that for the past few days, I've been the one texting my husband as Plumber NY. What I think is that Marcus has been planning romantic evenings with someone he thought was you, but was actually me." The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Marcus's face went from pale to green as he realized the implications of what I was saying. Every romantic text he'd sent to Plumber NY over the past few days had actually been sent to his wife. Every plan they'd made, every intimate detail he'd shared, every confession of how the affair made him feel, all of it had been captured by the person he'd been betraying. "That's impossible," Marcus said, but his voice had lost all its authority. "You were in Boston. You left this morning." "I was in a coffee shop 2 blocks from our apartment," I replied, "waiting for you to leave so I could come here and set up your surprise party." I pulled up the text conversation on my phone and held it up for the room to see. "Would you like me to read some of your messages, Marcus? The ones where you talked about how exciting it was to have someone who understood your ambitions. Or maybe the one where you said, 'I was lucky you married me, but you were tired of settling.'" Marcus lunged for my phone, but Dave stepped between us, apparently deciding that whatever was happening, it shouldn't involve physical altercations at a promotion party. "Sarah, please," Marcus said, his voice now reduced to desperate pleading. "This is all a misunderstanding. We can work this out. We can fix this." "Fix this?" I looked around the room at our friends, who were staring at Marcus like he'd revealed himself to be a serial killer. "Fix what, exactly? The fact that you've been cheating on me for 2 years? The fact that you've been billing your affair to our joint account? Or the fact that you've been emotionally abusing me while planning to leave me for my best friend?" 2 years? Angela said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You've been having an affair for 2 years?" Jessica finally found her voice. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It just happened. We never meant for anyone to get hurt." "Never meant for anyone to get hurt?" I was laughing now, but it wasn't a pleasant sound. "Jessica, you've been listening to me cry about my marriage for months. You've held me while I sobbed about feeling worthless and unloved. You've given me advice about how to be a better wife to a man who was cheating on me with you." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. While I'd been questioning my own sanity, wondering if I was being too sensitive or demanding too much from my marriage, my best friend had been actively sabotaging any chance of improvement. Every piece of advice she'd given me, every reassurance that things would get better, every suggestion that I should be more patient with Marcus, all of it had been designed to keep me compliant while they continued their affair. "The worst part," I continued, addressing Jessica directly, "is that you were my alibi tonight. When Marcus texted his mistress that I was going to be in Boston, he was making plans to cheat on me with the woman who was supposed to be here celebrating his promotion as my friend." The room was deadly quiet. Everyone was processing the layers of betrayal, the calculated nature of the deception, the way Jessica had been playing both sides of the situation for her own benefit. Tom cleared his throat. "I think," he said carefully, "we should probably leave you three to work this out privately." "No," I said firmly. "Please stay. I want witnesses for what comes next." I walked over to the refreshment table and picked up the bottle of champagne Angela had brought. After all, we're here to celebrate Marcus's promotion. We should toast his success. I popped the cork with more force than was probably necessary, sending it flying across the room. "To Marcus," I said, raising the bottle in a mock toast, "who got promoted to middle manager at Goldman Sachs and thought it made him Gordon Gekko." I took a swig directly from the bottle, a gesture that was probably undignified but felt absolutely appropriate for the occasion. "To Marcus," I continued, "who gave me a $500 monthly allowance while spending twice that on hotel rooms for his affair." Another swig. "To Marcus, who told me I was lucky he married me while he was planning to leave me for my best friend." The champagne was making me bold, or maybe it was just the relief of finally being able to speak the truth after months of gaslighting and manipulation. "And to Jessica," I said, turning to face my former best friend, who perfected the art of being a supportive friend while systematically destroying my marriage. Jessica was crying openly now, mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "Sarah, please, you have to understand. I never wanted it to happen this way." "How did you want it to happen?" I asked. "Were you planning to tell me eventually? Or were you just going to wait until Marcus divorced me and then comfort me through the breakup while you moved in with him?" The silence that followed suggested that my guess wasn't far from the truth. Marcus, meanwhile, had been standing in his ridiculous costume, apparently trying to process the complete destruction of his carefully constructed double life. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" I smiled at him, the first genuine smile I'd worn in months. "You forgot your phone Tuesday morning. Jessica sent you a text about how incredible Monday night was." "But the messages," he said desperately. "We always delete them. You couldn't have seen anything." "You're right," I agreed. "I couldn't see your old messages, but I could see your bank statements. 2 years of plumbing emergencies that coincidentally happened whenever I was out of the apartment. Hotel charges labeled as business expenses. Uber receipts to places you had no business being during work hours." I pulled out my laptop and set it on the refreshment table. "Would you like me to show everyone the spreadsheet I made? It's quite comprehensive. 2 years of data, cross-referenced by date, time, and expense amount." The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized I had documentation of his entire affair, a paper trail that proved not just infidelity, but systematic financial deception. "Sarah," he said, his voice cracking, "I can explain all of this." "I'm sure you can," I replied. "You're very creative with explanations. But I don't think our friends need to hear your justifications for why you've been stealing from our joint account to fund your affair." I turned to address the room. "The best part of all this is that for the past 3 weeks, Marcus has been sexting his own wife while planning to cheat on her. Every romantic message he thought he was sending to Jessica was actually coming to me." The irony was delicious. Marcus had been pouring his heart out to his mistress, not knowing he was actually confessing everything to his wife. He'd been planning elaborate romantic scenarios with someone he thought was Jessica, but was actually me manipulating him into exactly the situation I wanted. "You son of a bitch," Jessica suddenly said, rounding on Marcus with unexpected fury. "You told me she was in Boston. You said we had all evening together. You set me up." And there it was, the moment when the alliance between conspirators began to crumble. Jessica had just realized that Marcus had brought her to a party where his wife would be present, either through incompetence or deliberate manipulation. "I didn't know," Marcus protested. "She told me she was going to Boston. I had no idea she was planning this." "This?" Jessica's voice was rising to hysteria. "You think Sarah planned this? You think she wanted to find out about us like this?" "She's been playing us for days," Marcus shot back. "She's been pretending to be you. She's been manipulating both of us." The finger pointing was spectacular. Two people who had been secretly coordinating against me for months were now turning on each other, each trying to establish themselves as the victim of the other's deception. "Actually," I interrupted, "I've been manipulating Marcus for a few days. You, Jessica, I just discovered tonight. Although I have to say, your performance as my supportive best friend was really quite impressive." I took another swig of champagne and faced the room of our friends, who were watching this drama unfold with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. "Before we go any further," I announced, "I want everyone here to know that I've already filed for divorce. The papers were submitted Monday morning, along with all the financial evidence of Marcus's affair and his systematic theft from our joint accounts." Marcus's knees actually buckled. He had to grab the back of a chair to keep from falling over. "You can't," he said weakly. "We can work this out. We can go to counseling." "Counseling?" I laughed, and this time it was a genuinely amused sound. "Marcus, you've been stealing from me, cheating on me, and emotionally abusing me while I paid for the privilege. What exactly would we work out in counseling? More efficient ways for you to destroy my self-esteem?" I set down the champagne bottle and picked up my purse. "The lawyer said I should have everything finalized within 6 months. The good news is that New York is a no-fault divorce state, so your infidelity won't affect the asset division. The bad news is that your systematic financial deception probably will." Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. For 12 years, I'd been the compliant wife who absorbed his criticism and accepted his control. The woman standing in front of him now was someone entirely different. "The apartment lease is in both our names, but I've already found somewhere else to live," I continued. "You can keep the apartment if you can afford it on your own, which I doubt since I know exactly how much you make and how much you owe." I turned to Jessica. "As for you, I hope you enjoyed listening to me cry about my marriage while you were destroying it. I hope it gave you some kind of satisfaction to offer me advice on how to fix problems you were creating." Jessica was sobbing now, but I felt no sympathy for her. She'd had multiple opportunities to tell me the truth, to end the affair, to preserve our friendship. Instead, she'd chosen to maintain her position as my confidant while actively betraying me. "Sarah, please," she said through her tears. "Our friendship meant everything to me. I never wanted to hurt you." "Our friendship?" I shook my head. "Jessica, we haven't been friends for 2 years. You've been an actress playing the role of my friend while you stole my husband. That's not friendship. That's sociopathy." I looked around the room one final time. Our friends were still standing there with their champagne glasses and party smiles, probably wondering how a simple promotion celebration had turned into the complete destruction of 2 relationships. "Well," I said brightly, "this has been fun, but I have somewhere else to be. Thank you all for coming to Marcus's promotion party. I'm sure it will be memorable for everyone involved." I walked toward the exit, then paused and turned back to Marcus. "Oh, and Marcus, you might want to find a new plumber. I don't think Plumber NY is going to be available for emergency calls anymore." As I walked out of the event space, I could hear the explosion of voices behind me as our friends finally felt free to react to what they'd witnessed. There would be phone calls tomorrow, gossip that would spread through our social circle like wildfire, and a scandal that would follow Marcus and Jessica for years. But that was no longer my problem. I was free. The first thing I did after leaving the event space was find the nearest hotel bar and order a drink that cost more than Marcus would have approved of when he controlled our finances. The second thing I did was turn off my phone because I could already feel it buzzing with incoming calls and messages from people who wanted to dissect what they'd just witnessed. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I needed time to process the fact that I'd just blown up my entire life in the span of 30 minutes. The bartender was a woman about my age who took one look at my expression and poured me a double. "Rough day?" she asked. "You could say that," I replied. "I just discovered my husband has been cheating on me with my best friend for 2 years." "Ouch," she winced sympathetically. "What did you do about it?" "I tricked him into showing up to his own promotion party wearing heart-covered pajamas while I exposed his affair in front of all our friends." The bartender paused in the middle of wiping down a glass. "Seriously?" "Seriously." She set down the glass and extended her hand. "I'm Maria, and you are officially my hero." "I'm Sarah," I said, shaking her hand, "and I think I might have just destroyed my life." "Honey," Maria said, "from what you just told me, your life was already destroyed. You just finally noticed." She was right, of course. Marcus had been systematically dismantling my sense of self for months, isolating me from my own identity, making me dependent on his approval for any sense of worth. The marriage had been over long before I'd discovered the affair. I'd just been the last person to know. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced at it despite my intention to ignore all communications. The screen showed 14 missed calls and 23 unread messages. Angela, Tom, Linda, Dave, Rebecca. Everyone who'd witnessed the disaster wanted to talk. But the message that caught my attention was from a number I didn't recognize. "Is this Sarah Mitchell? This is Detective Amanda Rodriguez with the NYPD. We need to speak with you about some financial irregularities that have been reported. Please call me at your earliest convenience." My blood went cold. Financial irregularities. Marcus must have called the police and tried to claim that I'd stolen something, or that I'd committed fraud by intercepting his messages. He was probably trying to spin the situation to make himself look like the victim. I showed the message to Maria, who read it with a frown. "That doesn't sound right," she said. "If your husband was stealing from your joint account, you're the victim, not him. And intercepting messages on a phone registered to your joint account probably isn't illegal." "Should I call a lawyer first?" "Definitely. But Sarah, if the police are calling you about financial irregularities, it might not be about what you did. It might be about what your husband did." That possibility hadn't occurred to me, but it made sense. Marcus had been billing his affair expenses to our joint account for 2 years. He'd been lying on expense reports, probably claiming personal expenses as business costs. And if NY Plumbing LLC was a fake company that Jessica had set up to receive payments, there could be tax implications, fraud charges, or other legal issues I hadn't considered. I finished my drink and called the detective. "Detective Rodriguez, this is Sarah Mitchell. You left me a message about financial irregularities." "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for calling back. We've received a report about some unusual financial activity associated with your husband's accounts. We'd like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss what you might know about payments to a company called NY Plumbing LLC." "I know quite a lot about those payments," I said, "but I think I should bring a lawyer." "That's your right, of course. But Mrs. Mitchell, I want to be clear. You're not a suspect in this investigation. We believe you may be a victim." A victim? After months of being told I was overly sensitive, dramatic, and paranoid, it was validating to hear someone in authority acknowledge that I'd been wronged. "What kind of investigation?" I asked. "Your husband's employer contacted us this afternoon. Apparently, someone sent them documentation showing that Mr. Mitchell has been claiming personal expenses as business costs for the past 2 years. They're alleging embezzlement and fraud. Someone had sent documentation to Goldman Sachs, someone who had access to Marcus's financial records and knew about his creative accounting methods. Detective, can I ask who reported this? The complaint came from Goldman Sachs, but the documentation was provided by someone who identified herself as Jessica Chen. She said she had information about fraudulent business expenses that your husband had been claiming. Jessica. My former best friend had just thrown Marcus under the bus to save herself from whatever legal consequences she was facing for her role in the financial deception. The alliance between conspirators was officially over. I'll be happy to meet with you tomorrow, I told the detective. I have quite a lot of documentation myself. After I hung up, Maria poured me another drink without being asked. Sounds like your husband's day is about to get worse. Sounds like it, I agreed. Jessica must have realized she was going to be implicated in whatever financial crimes Marcus committed, so she decided to cooperate with the authorities. Smart move on her part. Terrible move for Marcus. My phone rang again, and this time it was a number I recognized, the divorce attorney I'd hired the previous week. Sarah, it's David Chen. No relation to Jessica, thankfully. I just got some very interesting calls. Apparently, your husband's employer is investigating him for embezzlement, and the police want to talk to you about financial irregularities. Can you tell me what happened tonight? I gave him the abbreviated version of the evening's events, focusing on the financial evidence I'd gathered and the affair I'd exposed. Sarah, he said when I finished, you need to understand that this changes everything about your divorce. If Marcus is convicted of embezzlement or fraud, it could affect your settlement significantly. And if he's been using joint account funds for illegal purposes, you might be entitled to additional compensation. What does that mean in practical terms? It means, instead of splitting your assets 50-50, you might be entitled to a much larger portion. It also means Marcus might not be able to afford to fight the divorce, especially if he loses his job and faces criminal charges. The irony was perfect. Marcus's affair, which had been funded by his systematic theft from our joint account, was going to end up costing him far more than just our marriage. His creative financing for his infidelity was about to destroy his career, his freedom, and his financial future. There's something else, David continued. I've been contacted by Jessica Chen's attorney. She wants to provide testimony about the affair and the financial arrangements in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She's really covering all her bases, isn't she? It appears so. Sarah, I know this woman was your friend, but from a legal standpoint, her cooperation could be very beneficial for your case. Jessica was saving herself by destroying Marcus, which was probably justice of a sort. She'd betrayed our friendship for 2 years. Now she was betraying Marcus to avoid legal consequences. At least she was consistent in her willingness to sacrifice other people for her own benefit. I stayed at the hotel bar until closing time, processing the reality that my carefully planned revenge had spiraled into something much larger than I'd anticipated. I'd wanted to humiliate Marcus and expose his affair. Instead, I'd apparently triggered criminal investigations that could send him to prison. When I finally made it back to my new apartment, a studio in Brooklyn that I'd rented the previous week under my maiden name, I found that my phone had accumulated 47 missed calls and 62 unread messages. I poured myself a glass of wine and started reading through them. Angela. Sarah, what the hell just happened? Call me immediately. Tom. Are you okay? That was the most insane thing I've ever witnessed. Linda. I can't believe Marcus and Jessica did that to you. We're here if you need anything. Dave. Rebecca wants to know if you need somewhere to stay tonight. My sister Rachel, who had provided my alibi. Mom called and said something about Marcus being arrested. What is going on? Arrested. I hadn't heard that Marcus had been arrested, but it wouldn't surprise me if Goldman Sachs had moved quickly once they received Jessica's documentation. The message that made me laugh, though, was from my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who was 80 years old and had apparently gotten the gossip chain already. Dear, I heard about your husband's affair and wanted you to know that I never liked him. He never held the elevator and his music was too loud. You're better off without him. Also, do you want his mail forwarded somewhere specific?" I fell asleep that night for the first time in months without feeling anxious about the next day. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about Marcus's mood, his expectations, his approval, or his criticism. I wasn't calculating grocery budgets or wondering if I'd said something to annoy him or trying to anticipate his needs before he expressed them. I was free to sleep peacefully, and I did. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new office in Midtown Manhattan, reviewing contracts for my consulting business when my assistant buzzed me with an update I'd been expecting. "Sarah, your attorney is on line 1. He says the divorce is final." The divorce was final. After 12 years of marriage, I was officially single again, with a settlement that had exceeded everyone's expectations thanks to Marcus's creative financial strategies finally catching up with him. Marcus had been convicted of embezzlement and fraud, sentenced to 18 months in federal prison, and ordered to pay restitution to Goldman Sachs. His conviction had voided the prenuptial agreement we'd signed, and his theft from our joint account had entitled me to punitive damages that essentially gave me everything we'd accumulated during our marriage. I got the apartment, the savings, the investment accounts, and even Marcus's car, which I'd promptly sold because I had no use for a vehicle that reminded me of my former life. More importantly, I'd gotten my life back. Starting my consulting business had been easier than I'd expected. 12 years of managing Marcus's life had taught me project management, strategic planning, and crisis resolution, skills that translated perfectly to helping other people organize their businesses and solve their problems. My first client had been Angela, who'd hired me to plan her wedding after witnessing what she called the most epic takedown in social history. Word had spread from there, and within 3 months I had more clients than I could handle. The irony wasn't lost on me that Marcus's systematic destruction of my confidence had actually prepared me to be an entrepreneur. Years of having my every decision questioned had taught me to be thorough in my research. Months of being told I was overly sensitive had taught me to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. And a lifetime of managing Marcus's moods had taught me how to handle difficult clients with diplomacy and patience. "Sarah," my assistant said over the intercom, "there's a Jessica Chen here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important." Jessica. I hadn't spoken to her since the night of Marcus's promotion party, though I'd heard through mutual friends that she'd moved to Chicago after testifying against Marcus in his criminal trial. I'd assumed our paths would never cross again. "Send her in," I said, curious about what could have brought her back to New York into my office. She looked different, older somehow, and definitely less confident than the woman who'd spent 2 years manipulating both me and Marcus for her own benefit. Her hair was shorter, her clothes were more conservative, and she had the nervous energy of someone who wasn't sure how they'd be received. "Sarah," she said as she sat down across from my desk, "thank you for seeing me." "Jessica," I replied neutrally, "what brings you to New York?" "I'm moving back. I got a job offer here, and I needed to talk to you before I accepted it." I leaned back in my chair and studied her. "What did you want to talk about?" "I wanted to apologize. I know it's too late, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that I regret everything that happened." "Everything that happened?" I repeated. "You mean everything you did?" She flinched. "Yes, everything I did. The affair, the lies, pretending to be your friend while I was betraying you, all of it." And what prompted this sudden attack of conscience? Jessica was quiet for a moment, looking down at her hands. "Therapy," she said finally. "A lot of therapy, and time to think about what kind of person I'd become." I waited for her to continue. "The affair with Marcus wasn't about love," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't even about attraction. It was about power. I liked knowing something you didn't know. I liked being chosen over someone who was supposed to be more important. I liked having control over both of your lives without either of you knowing it. The honesty was startling. I'd expected excuses, justifications, maybe claims that she'd fallen in love and couldn't help herself. Instead, she was acknowledging something much darker. "And our friendship?" I asked. "I convinced myself it was real," she said. "I told myself I could compartmentalize, that I could be a good friend to you while I was sleeping with your husband. But the truth is, I was using your friendship too. I liked being your confidant because it gave me information about your marriage that I could use to my advantage." She looked up at me, and I could see tears in her eyes. "Sarah, you were a better friend to me than I deserved, and I destroyed that for the thrill of manipulation. There's no excuse for what I did." I sat quietly for a moment, processing her words. The Jessica who'd sat in my living room listening to me cry about my marriage troubles, who'd offered advice and support and reassurance, had been calculating how to use my vulnerability to strengthen her position with my husband. It was sociopathic behavior wrapped in the language of friendship. "Jessica," I said finally, "I appreciate your honesty, but I need you to understand something. You didn't just betray me with Marcus. You weaponized my trust against me. You used my friendship as a tool to hurt me more effectively." She nodded, tears flowing freely now. "I know, and I know there's no way to make up for that." "You're right," I agreed. "There isn't." "I don't expect forgiveness," she said. "I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did and that I'm trying to become a better person." I studied her for another moment. She seemed genuinely remorseful, genuinely changed by whatever process she'd gone through in Chicago. But remorse didn't undo damage, and change didn't erase history. "Jessica," I said, "I hope you do become a better person. I hope you learn to build relationships based on honesty rather than manipulation. But I need you to understand that we will never be friends again." She nodded. "I understand. And if you're moving back to New York, you need to know that I'm not going to pretend this conversation changed anything between us. If we run into each other at social events, I'll be polite but distant. I won't speak negatively about you to mutual friends, but I also won't engage with you beyond basic courtesy." "That's more than I deserve," she said. "Yes," I agreed. "It is." She stood up to leave, then paused at the door. "Sarah, for what it's worth, watching you that night, seeing you take control of the situation, seeing you stand up for yourself, it was the first time I realized what strength actually looked like. I'd spent 2 years thinking I was powerful because I was manipulating people, but you were powerful because you chose truth over comfort." After she left, I sat in my office thinking about power, manipulation, and the different ways people choose to navigate the world. Jessica had found power in secrets and deception. Marcus had found power in control and diminishment. But I discovered something different, the power that comes from refusing to accept unacceptable treatment, even when that refusal costs you everything you thought you wanted. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. "Drinks tonight? I have gossip about the Henderson divorce that will make your situation look like a romantic comedy." I smiled and texted back, "Absolutely, but I'm buying the first round." 6 months ago, I'd been a woman whose husband gave her a grocery allowance and whose best friend was systematically destroying her marriage. Tonight, I was having drinks with a real friend who valued my company, not my vulnerability. The transformation had been worth every minute of pain, humiliation, and uncertainty that had led to it. 2 years after the promotion party that ended my marriage, I was having lunch with Maria, the bartender who'd become a genuine friend, when she pointed across the restaurant with her fork. "Isn't that your ex-husband?" I turned to look and saw Marcus sitting at a corner table, hunched over a cup of coffee like it contained the secrets of the universe. He looked older, thinner, and significantly less confident than the man who'd once lectured me about maintaining appropriate standards for a manager's wife. Prison had not been kind to him. "Should we leave?" Maria asked. "No," I said, cutting into my salmon. "He has as much right to eat lunch in public as I do." Marcus hadn't noticed me yet. which gave me a chance to observe him without the complications of direct interaction. He was reading what looked like job listings on his phone, making notes in a small notebook with the careful attention of someone who couldn't afford to miss any opportunities. The past 2 years had been humbling for Marcus in ways that his promotion to middle manager never was. After serving 18 months in federal prison for embezzlement and fraud, he'd been released to discover that his reputation in the financial industry was essentially non-existent. No one wanted to hire a convicted fraudster, regardless of how middle management his previous position had been. According to mutual friends who still kept in touch with both of us, a delicate social balancing act that required careful navigation, Marcus was working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Queens, making about 1/3 of his former salary and living in a studio apartment that was roughly the size of our former walk-in closet. Justice, it seemed, had a sense of irony. "Ma'am?" I looked up to see our waitress standing beside our table, looking slightly uncomfortable. "The gentleman over there asked me to give you this," she said, handing me a folded piece of paper. "He said his name was Marcus and that you'd know who he was." I unfolded the note, which was written in Marcus's familiar handwriting. "Sarah, I know I have no right to ask, but could we talk? Just for a few minutes. I won't take up much of your time. M." I looked over at Marcus, who was watching me with the hopeful expression of someone who desperately needed something but wasn't sure they deserved it. "What do you want to do?" Maria asked. "I'm curious," I admitted. "It's been 2 years. I wonder what he could possibly have to say." I wrote 5 minutes on the back of his note and had the waitress return it to him. Marcus came over to our table immediately, as if he'd been waiting for permission to breathe. Up close, the changes in him were even more apparent. The expensive suits had been replaced by off-the-rack clothing that didn't quite fit. The confident posture had been replaced by the slightly hunched shoulders of someone who'd learned to make themselves smaller in uncomfortable spaces. "Sarah," he said, "thank you for agreeing to talk to me." 5 minutes, I reminded him. "Right." He took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize. I know it's late, and I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that I understand what I did to you was unforgivable." "Which part?" I asked. "The emotional abuse, the financial control, the affair, or the systematic theft from our joint account?" He flinched at each item on the list. "All of it. Everything. I turned into someone I don't recognize, and I made your life hell in the process." "You didn't turn into someone you don't recognize, Marcus. You revealed who you always were when you thought you had enough power to get away with it." "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe that's who I really am. But I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, and I'm ashamed of it." I studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving motivation. But he seemed genuinely broken in a way that suggested real consequences rather than performed remorse. "What do you want from me, Marcus?" "Nothing," he said. "I don't want anything from you. I just wanted you to know that you deserved better. You deserved so much better than what I gave you." "Yes," I agreed. "I did." "I heard about your business. Angela told me you're doing really well." "I am." "I'm glad. You were always smart about people and situations. I was an idiot for not recognizing that." "You weren't an idiot, Marcus. You were threatened by it. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. "I saw Jessica last month," he said finally. "That was interesting." "How is she?" "She's engaged to some guy from Chicago. She seems happy." "Good for her." "She told me she apologized to you." "She did." "Did you forgive her?" I considered the question. I accepted her apology. But forgiveness and reconciliation are different things. Jessica made choices that revealed her character, and I made choices based on that revelation. Marcus nodded like he understood the distinction. "Sarah, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but are you happy?" The question surprised me with its simplicity. "Yes, Marcus, I'm very happy." "Good," he said, and he seemed to mean it. You deserve to be happy." He stood up to leave, then paused. "Sarah, I know this is probably the last time we'll ever talk, but I want you to know something. That night at the party, when you exposed everything, it was the first time in our entire marriage that I saw who you really were." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I spent 12 years trying to make you smaller, trying to convince you that you needed me to make decisions for you, trying to control your sense of reality. But that night, you orchestrated something so brilliant, so perfectly planned, that I realized I'd been living with a strategist the entire time." He smiled, and for a moment I glimpsed the man I'd married before he'd become obsessed with power and control. "I was terrified of you that night," he continued. "Not because you were cruel, but because you were competent. Because you'd outsmarted me completely, and I realized that you'd probably been capable of outsmarting me the entire time if you'd wanted to. I didn't want to outsmart you, Marcus. I wanted to be married to you." "I know. And I threw that away because I was too insecure to be married to someone who might be smarter than me." He extended his hand. "Thank you for talking to me, Sarah, and congratulations on building the life you deserve." I shook his hand, noting that his grip was gentler than it used to be, less possessive. "Good luck with the job search, Marcus." After he left, Maria and I sat in silence for a few minutes. "Well," she said finally, "that was unexpected." "Prison has a way of clarifying people's priorities," I replied. "Do you think he meant it? The apology?" I considered the question. I think he meant it as much as Marcus is capable of meaning anything, but I also think he's learned that taking responsibility for his actions is better for his self-image than continuing to blame other people for his problems. That's fairly cynical. That's fairly realistic. Marcus isn't fundamentally different than he was 2 years ago. He's just been forced to confront consequences he couldn't manipulate or control. And how do you feel about seeing him? That was the interesting question. I expected to feel anger or satisfaction at his reduced circumstances, or maybe residual hurt from the way he'd treated me. Instead, I felt something closer to indifference. Marcus had been a chapter in my life, but he wasn't the story. The story was what I'd built after leaving him. The business, the friendships, the sense of autonomy and competence that I'd recovered after years of being told I was inadequate. "I feel like I closed a book I finished reading a long time ago," I said. "That's very zen of you." "That's very practical of me. Holding on to anger about Marcus would be like holding on to anger about a natural disaster. It was damaging when it happened, but it's over now, and I've rebuilt something better from what remained." My phone buzzed with a text from my newest client, a startup founder who needed help organizing her company's expansion into international markets. The project was challenging and exciting, exactly the kind of work that reminded me why I'd enjoyed my career before I'd sacrificed it for Marcus's trajectory. "I have to get back to the office," I told Maria, "but thank you for being here for this." "Any time. That's what friends do. Real friends. The kind who show up without expecting anything in return, who listen without calculating how to use the information, who support without manipulating." As I walked back to my office, I thought about the different versions of myself I'd been over the years. The young woman who'd fallen in love with Marcus's confidence and ambition. The wife who'd gradually lost herself in service to his career. The broken woman who'd discovered her husband's affair and felt like her world was ending. The strategist who'd planned and executed perfect revenge. And now, the entrepreneur who'd built a successful business and a life she actually enjoyed living. Each version had been necessary. Each had taught me something important about strength, vulnerability, and the difference between the two. But this version, the woman who could have a civil conversation with her ex-husband without feeling diminished by it, this was the version I'd been working toward all along. That evening, I was in my apartment cooking dinner for myself, a skill I'd rediscovered after years of cooking for Marcus's preferences, when my phone rang. It was Angela. "Sarah, you will not believe who I just saw at the grocery store." "Marcus," I said. I had lunch near him today. No, not Marcus. Jessica. She's back in town and she was buying ingredients for what looked like a dinner party. Good for her. She asked about you. She wanted to know if you were seeing anyone. I laughed. Why would she want to know that? I think she feels guilty about everything that happened and she's hoping you've found happiness. I have found happiness, but it doesn't have anything to do with whether I'm seeing anyone. Are you, though? Seeing anyone? It was a question I got frequently from well-meaning friends who seemed to think that romantic partnership was the ultimate goal of post-divorce recovery. The assumption was that I must be lonely, that I must be looking for someone to replace Marcus, that my happiness was somehow incomplete without a romantic relationship. I'm dating, I said, which was true, but I'm not looking for anyone to complete me or save me or take care of me. I'm looking for someone who enhances a life I already enjoy. That's very healthy. That's very different from who I was when I was married to Marcus. After I hung up with Angela, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my balcony overlooking the Manhattan skyline. My apartment was smaller than the one I'd shared with Marcus, but it was entirely mine. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every book on the shelves reflected my taste rather than someone else's vision of what our life should look like. It was the first space I'd ever inhabited that felt completely authentic to who I was. My phone buzzed with a text from the startup founder I was consulting with. Sarah, the presentation you put together is brilliant. The investors were incredibly impressed. I think we're going to get the funding we need for expansion. Thank you for helping me organize my vision into something other people could understand. That message meant more to me than any romantic declaration ever had. It was acknowledgement of my professional competence, recognition of my ability to solve complex problems, validation of the skills I'd developed through years of managing difficult situations. It was the kind of appreciation I'd never received from Marcus, who'd seen my capabilities as threats rather than assets. As the sun set over Manhattan, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. 2 years ago, I'd been a woman whose husband controlled her grocery budget and whose best friend was systematically destroying her marriage. Tonight, I was a successful entrepreneur with genuine friendships and a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with anyone else's approval. The revenge I'd planned against Marcus had been perfect in its execution, but the real victory hadn't been his humiliation. The real victory had been the discovery that I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined when I was limiting myself to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. Marcus had spent years trying to convince me that I was lucky he'd married me, that I needed his guidance to navigate the world, that I was too sensitive and dramatic to make good decisions on my own. Instead, I'd turned out to be someone who could build a business from scratch, maintain authentic relationships, and create a life that brought me genuine satisfaction rather than just the absence of conflict. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't destroying Marcus's life. The best revenge was building my own. If this story of turning betrayal into triumph inspired you, drop a like and let me know in the comments what you thought of Sarah's journey. Your support helps me bring you more stories of people who refuse to stay victims.